Hello everyone, OsakaSyndrome, back at you with another video. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about the feeling of motivation that comes from not understanding things in your target language. Because believe me, it'll happen a lot. Even after you understand quite a bit, you're still going to run into many things which you do not understand. And this makes sense given the fact that learning a language is about acquiring words. Not only is it about acquiring words, it's about understanding what they mean in context, as words often change in their meaning depending on how they're used. And so, even with things that are familiar, you might come to meet turns of phrase or, context in which these words that you thought you knew end up meaning something else. But the important thing to understand when you find these things that you don't understand is to remember the okay, that was a strange sentence, but it is to remember that it's okay to not understand, and not only is it okay to not understand, this should motivate you. This should this should ignite this fire inside of you to go, okay, no, I'm not just going to not understand this, I'm going to figure this out and I am going to intuitively understand it in the future. This is how I feel when I encounter things in media in Spanish. When I can't understand it, I experience this like incredible feeling of motivation that says, this language is so beautiful. This world is so beautiful that this language occupies. And I am going to understand it. I am going to be able to utilize these words and really feel them in the deepest way possible. And that's the feeling you've got to have. So, as you know, I'm not really into drugs. I don't do that sort of thing. And I find them to be a distraction. Not just a distraction, but one that, like, fundamentally messes up your ability to feel rewarded by other activities that are more conducive to growing as a person and improving. But I also have nostalgia for years ago when I used to do drugs. Particularly when I was into marijuana when I was high school age. Those are things that bring back fond memories for me. And when I was that age, it still wasn't legal in, I think it's half the country now it's legal for recreational purposes, and then almost the entire country they have it for medical. But that was a different time. I think, when I was in school, like Illinois hadn't even legalized yet, so it was a different time. But I come across this video here. I come across this video from like 2010 of these guys having built an igloo to smoke weed in. And like just the image of these fellas having built all of this and like hanging out with each other just to kind of hide from the police so that their house doesn't stink up, so that they don't have the smell outside that could potentially attract attention from the authorities or something. It's like such a prohibition vibe. That's what I'm going to call it. Like, this is a prohibition vibe. And it kind of reminds me of the sort of stuff that I would do in order to hide from the law, so to say, when I was a kid, or just to not be as noticeable. I never did anything as big as this, though I could totally see myself having done that back then. Um, and I don't know, it just feels like comfy times, like it just feels like a comfy time to live, really. And I feel like the soul is kind of lost when you have, you know, huge uh, multi-state corporations that are selling these regulated products that are in packaging which are meant to, be conducive to, state standards and things like that. Um, I think you start to lose some of the soul of just having an unregulated product from a guy that you're really excited to have, that you bring all of your friends together to partake in. And in the process, you're kind of hiding from the law because you don't want to get found out doing what you're doing. I think I think there's like a soul to that you only really understand if you're there. You don't really get it if you weren't there at the time to experience it. But if you were there, you feel kind of nostalgic for it. And I'm saying this as someone who, again, doesn't do drugs, has no intention of ever doing them again, but also as someone who wants to have not just marijuana, but all drugs legal worldwide. I think that's how you take out these multinational criminals who make billions of dollars in an industry that is never going anywhere, you know. That's also how you save millions of people from preventable deaths that occur due to tainted products. You provide a regulated product as the alternative. So, it's not like I'm against all of these regulations um, and the legalization of these things. It's also not as if I'm in favor of doing these things, right? I take every opportunity I can to warn people against starting this stuff, and I talk very openly about my distaste for this stuff and my desire to not do it. Um, and even back when I did this stuff, I would discourage people as much as possible from ever starting or ever trying it simply because I thought you're a bad influence if you encourage people to do something that, they may end up having problems with later down the road. Um, so I've always had like, I guess you could say, somewhat, at least on the margins, moderate perspective on this stuff, but that's not going to stop me from having some residual nostalgia for a time uh, when I was a little bit younger. And I think that's the case for a lot of people, who used to do this stuff and then they can see all the problems with it. They can see why they don't want to do it ever again. They still remember like there was a reason why I was doing this at one point, right? There was a time when it was fun. And I think that's a difficult thing for people to grapple with because if they're to acknowledge that, then that means that they, have to acknowledge that this thing that they're very against was good in some way at some point. And I think they sort of fear acknowledging that because it's like, oh, well, what if that becomes a motivation for me starting again? But it's like, who I am now versus who I was then that's two very different things. Those are two very different people. Um, and I think it's okay to acknowledge that, right? It's okay to have empathy for your past self. And it's also okay to stake out, policy positions that are sort of rooted in a desire for public health and equity, and better outcomes for society, and also freedom, for individuals, while also, discouraging people as much as possible from doing this stuff, right? I mean, that's the whole point of harm reduction. It's acknowledging that a lot of people are going to do it anyway, so they might as well do it in a way that reduces the harms associated with whatever they're doing. But then at the same time, you have uh, this clear opposition to doing it. Um, but needless to say, I do have nostalgia. Very little. It's very muted. But when I come across stuff like this, it makes me um, it makes me think about a different time, not just in my life, but in history, because this kind of stuff wouldn't, I don't think it would happen again. These guys wouldn't be making this igloo in the modern day because you don't really have anything to hide from.